Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Dumo Denga. Hello, Dumo Denga. How are you doing?
I am good, Lipton. It is great to be on your show. I love your channel growth. You're doing very well, and it's an honor. It's just an honor to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be speaking to you, Dumo. Dumo, what is going on in South Africa?
Yeah, so South Africa is a very interesting country. And, what happened over the past few weeks has just been a culmination of of just bad economic policies, growing poverty, and so forth. So what we saw basically with regards to the riots was a spark that was thrown into what you could say with dry grass, was thrown into dry grass. So usually when there's dry wood and stuff, if you take a match and you just throw it on, you get a fire. So basically that's what's been happening. The climate has been set for a very I wouldn't say violent, but a very noticeable unrest, and that noticeable unrest has occurred. And just to give you some background into what's happening in South Africa, what we have seen is that from, let's go from the Mbeki years, when Mbeki was president. So Mbeki was president after Nelson Mandela, and during his time there was good economic growth. We're having growth of like 4% every year, which was good. I mean, a lot of Black people were getting out of poverty, were joining the middle class. In South Africa, we have this term called the Black middle class, and that has been growing significantly. And what happened after that? The debt in South Africa was paid off. And South Africa looked like they were in a very good economic position. Then Zuma came in under controversial circumstances. And that was, just to give some insight into that, with Zuma, what happened was, he was implicated in a deal that was done in 1999, the arms deal, and his financial advisor Shabir Sheikh was actually imprisoned, and he was supposed to be trialed on a later date. And then coincidentally, he became the president of the ANC, and then when he became the president of the ANC, the charges were dropped, and then he became the president of South Africa. And then during his time, oh my word, I mean, we've seen everything. I mean, we saw he was just giving money to his friends, giving contracts to people that are in close relation with him, and the debt went up. Now, if you look at our GDP to debt ratio, it's actually at about it's over 90%. Oh, sorry, yeah, no, it's debt to GDP ratio. Sorry, it's close to 90%, and and then during that time, he wasn't really he would say he's a communist, but he wasn't really a communist in the true sense. So basically, he just was a guy who just liked to have fun and so forth. And then, there was that scandal with his house. Remember, he spent, I think, 246 million rand on his homestead. So if you put that in dollars, that's just over, if I'm not mistaken, just over $20 million that he spent on his house. And that was a big controversy because other people from the ANC benefited and so forth. So obviously he was getting a bad rap, and then eventually he resigned after pressure from the ANC, and then now Ramaphosa is the president. Now Ramaphosa becomes the president. He starts introducing policies that again make the country worse. He introduced the minimum wage in 2019. In 2019, our economic growth was about 0.9%, which is not good at all. And then obviously the coronavirus came along, and then he introduced these lockdowns. And the lockdown was it just devastated everything, and a lot of people lost their jobs. I mean, in one quarter, I think 2 million people lost their jobs. That's a lot in South African terms, since we have a population that's close to 60 million. And just to give you some perspective on those stats, we have about I think if I'm not mistaken, we have about 10 million people that are employed in South Africa. And then we also have about 18 million people who are actually dependent on social grants, which is not a good situation to be in. And, during the lockdown, Ramaphosa introduced ridiculous regulations. I mean, for example, if you wanted to go to the mall and buy something, and you wanted to buy, let's say, some clothes, there were only specific clothes you could buy. Even e-commerce was banned for a while until a few brave people made an intervention by actually going to court and taking the government to court about that. So basically, industries in South Africa were destroyed completely. And then obviously when the riots came, this was actually a situation that was sparked by Zuma. So remember Zuma, he was in contempt of court. Just to give a background story into the court situation, he was supposed to appear at the Zondo Commission. The Zondo Commission was actually a commission of inquiry into state capture. So basically, during the Zuma years, there was a lot of corruption that went along. So the Zondo Commission was a commission that was going to get the evidence out. So Zuma was called initially. He testified there. Then he was called again. And then he said, look, I'm not going there. And I don't know if he did this under the advice of his lawyers or what, but he decided not to go. And then it was ruled that he was in contempt of court. And he was sentenced to 15 months in jail. And that's when the magic started to happen. So he was at his homestead. He had 5 days to hand himself over to the police. And there's a lot of people at his house. And a lot of them were his supporters. And then eventually handed himself over to the police. After he handed himself over to the police, that's when the violence started. But it started on a small scale, right? And then it escalated. So it first started off with people burning stuff, and then they started burning other things and destroying other items or key economic supply chain infrastructure. And now many people have said that the riots actually were caused by the arrest of Zuma. I take a different opinion. I think the arrest of Zuma did play a role, but I think given the South Africa's economic situation, there were a lot of people who were angry, and they used this opportunity to kind of, vent their anger. And some people also saw this as an opportunity to take part in opportunistic looting as well. As you saw, a lot of malls were looted, a lot of businesses were devastated as a result, especially in KZN. So KZN, which is known as KwaZulu-Natal, it's basically the province where Zulu people live, right? That's basically where you'll find a lot of Zulu people. And just to also give perspective on the Zuma's perspective, he's Zulu himself. And a lot of people felt that there is a theory, let me put it to you that way, that Zuma himself, when he was getting prosecuted, people felt that a lot of Zulus were getting marginalized within the ANC. So basically, if you look at Ramaphosa's vendor, and if you look at the ANC top 6, I don't think there's any Zulu people there. I mean, if you look at, the Zulu people, Zulus felt they were marginalized. So many people felt this was like some sort of ethnic mobilization. That is a possible theory, but I still think that Zuma had little to do with it with regards to how the thing escalated. I think it started because of Zuma, but then as it progressed, other factors started to come into account. And then you could see, for example, the opportunistic looting, the sabotage, and everything like that. And then our president, Ramaphosa, he speaks about this. And when he spoke about this, he said that initially he said this was ethnic mobilization. And then he changed his tune and said that, no, now it is an insurrection, similar to the language of January 6th in the United States. And what is very interesting about that statement was that his defense minister, Ramaphosa's defense minister, said that it wasn't an insurrection at first, but then she had to change her tune and say, no, it was an insurrection. So there's been a lot of confusion with regards to that, but in essence, it wasn't an insurrection. What my theory is that there was a small spark, which was Zuma's arrest, and then it happened during a lockdown where a lot of people were angry and so forth. And then it escalated. And as it escalated, people started to see the opportunity of criminality and they took part in that. So that's pretty much what has been happening in South Africa over the past 2 weeks. I hope that was not too long, but
Not a problem. I like your analysis. It is interesting. And as the interviewer, it is more prudent for me to listen more and speak less.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, I mean, it's that's South Africa in a nutshell. I mean, I just want to just go on to the other theories. There were talks of some people saying that it was organized. And I think there was some element of organization, because I mean, I went on Twitter and I saw that there were allegations that people were getting bussed into malls. So by being bussed in, I mean people being transported in buses to malls so that they could loot. So it seems like there was some element of mobilization there. And and what was very interesting about that is there were some stories again where people felt that, well, people said that they were approached by people with guns, people working in let's say factories and so forth, and they were told to leave. And then those factories ended up being destroyed. There was also an incident where trucks that were carrying goods that were going to go to Gauteng. So Gauteng is another province in South Africa. So just to give you some perspective, there's one major highway or main road in South Africa called the N3. The N3 is a popular road that is used to go from Johannesburg to Durban, and trucks use, and a lot of supplies that are transported from KZN go into Gauteng. So what you need to understand is that since KZN's on the coast, they receive a lot of shipments from overseas, and then from there it gets taken from KZN to Gauteng, and the N3 route is used. Many trucks were burnt as a result, and then that was actually sent a supply shock. A lot of people panic bought as a result. I remember from my experience. Sorry, let me take one step back. With regards to supplies, including petrol as well, is also transported using the N3. If you buy petrol in KZN, for example, it'll be cheaper than Gauteng because it's on the coast. So what you'll find is that I even filled up my car in fear that there might not be any petrol left, because all the supply chain infrastructure was actually attacked and destroyed. Not all of it, but key points were. And I panic bought petrol. So I filled up my car and I went home. And what is very interesting about that is our energy minister, in an attempt to stop people from panic buying, what he did, he made a regulation saying that if you are going to buy petrol and put it into a container, that should not be allowed. Because a lot of people are taking petrol and putting it into containers just to be safe, instead of putting it into their cars. So our energy minister, Gwede Mantashe, actually made a ruling saying that, no, you can't do something like that, which I think for me was silly, because that means someone can just take their car, fill it up with petrol, and then take the petrol out, put it into a container, and then tell someone to go to another petrol station and say, listen, fill up my car, and they can work a way around it. So yeah, that is pretty much what I've experienced with regards to the riots.
Dumo, in your introduction, you noted that the government wanted to ban some aspects of e-commerce. Why?
Right. Okay. So this was one of this is the lockdown, right? So last year sometime, we have a department called a Department of Trade and Industry, and the minister of that department is Ibrahim Patel. So these guys are communists, right? So when the lockdown was first introduced, I felt that a lot of the regulations that were placed were just there because the government wanted this high element of control. They wanted this high degree of control. Let me put it to you that way. So they started making regulations that didn't make sense. So first it was the alcohol ban, Then they said the e-commerce ban. So I'll tell you why. So the reason why they introduced the e-commerce ban was because, well, let me take one step back. So the e-commerce ban, firstly, was that they said that if you buy something online, it can only be an essential product. And then the government listed essential products. And these are things like cosmetics, mundane stuff, just but not even food. If I was not mistaken, could I buy food? No, you couldn't even buy food. The only food that you could buy was just stuff that was at service stations. And the reason why they made that ruling was because they said it was unfair, because they felt that the smaller businesses that did not have e-commerce, because they were banned from operating due to the virus, then therefore it wouldn't be fair to allow someone else to operate. But then that just breaks all logic, because, and I can see your face now, it's like, wow, like,
yeah, because the small businesses would need consumers to support their product. If you ban e-commerce, then the small businesses are going to fail because they can't compete. It wouldn't be called an e-commerce business if it wasn't promoting e-commerce and soliciting from people who are interested in e-commerce.
Exactly. And in South Africa, there's another layer added to that, because in South Africa, you'll find that there's a lot of these businesses in the township called spaza shops. So these are like small convenience stores that are owned by homeowners. So imagine, like, you go next door, there's someone who sells like bread and milk and so forth. So we have these spaza shops, and they were banned from operating. So their logic was that because this man was banned from operating, therefore we need to ban e-commerce. And as you mentioned, now a lot of small businesses depend on e-commerce, which is true. And as a result of that, this was challenged in court. Well, it was going to be challenged in court by a group of lawyers. One of them was actually on my show by the name of Mark Oppenheimer. So what they wanted, they challenged it by saying that it wouldn't be wise to ban e-commerce, because if you do ban it, it's you're actually banning a way for people to buy products safely, because when the virus became rampant, a lot of individuals decided, look, I'm not going to go to the mall anymore to buy something. I'd rather buy something online. And even the e-commerce platforms, when they delivered your goods, they were even practicing social distancing when delivering it. So what they'll do is they'll come to your house, and then they'll leave. Because in South Africa, when items are delivered, we do them a bit differently to other countries. So what will happen is the guy will come, usually, let's say before the pandemic, he'll just come, wait at your gate, and you tell him, and he tells you that you're at the gate. You go get your item, you're done. But now what they do is, during the pandemic, is that they said, okay, cool. What we'll do is we'll come to your house, and then we'll leave the item just by your gate, far enough there so that you can see us, and then you just come collect your item, and then you're done. So even they were practicing that. So what they were saying in a nutshell was, what they argued in court was that, look, a lot of people are using e-commerce as another means to buy goods and services online, and it's actually a safer way of actually buying goods and services. And eventually, guess what? The government said, okay, cool. Now people can use e-commerce as a result of doing that. And I was just surprised that the government did not even think of that when they made their regulations in the first place. It actually took some citizens to challenge this in court for them to actually change their minds. And yeah, that's just one of the ridiculous regulations that have been placed in South Africa as a result of the lockdowns.
E-commerce is a bulwark against the transmission of the coronavirus. If you're shopping online at home, then you're not interacting with other people. It is common sense.
Well, something that the South African government doesn't have, from what I can see.
And furthermore, the market determines the essence of demand. You cannot argue that one product is essential. Essential is a relative term.
Definitely. And that was another argument that was brought up by those who were against the use of the word essential items. it's relative because we all have different needs. It just goes back to what Mises was saying when he was writing his was it Mises? Yeah, Mises, was it Hayek?
No,
One of the two. I'm so sorry.
Hayek wrote on spontaneous order. So if you're talking about central planning, then I believe your reference is Hayek, but Mises also wrote human action. So
Yes.
their views are parallel.
Yes, they parallel. So and it was an essay written, I think, after the Russian Revolution, and then the calculation problem was brought up, right?
Yeah. Ludwig Mises wrote on the calculation problem.
Yes, it was Mises. So basically, we're seeing the same thing in South Africa, right? So what happens is Mises argued that the economy is just way too complex. There are too many players in the economy, different needs from each person, and their subjective needs and relative needs, as you mentioned. And the government can't make decisions on behalf of so many people more efficiently than the market. And that's exactly what we saw here in South Africa, is that when the government said that, no, you can only buy these goods on a specific platform, well, what makes you think that those are essential? I mean, when I went onto those platforms when the ban was in place, I looked at it and I'm like, wow, I don't need these things. Like, and that's the reality. It's just because the government says it's essential doesn't mean it's essential. And I totally agree with you. And you made a great point there when you said that essential is a relative term. I like the way you put it there.
So, for example, we're told that facial coverings can slow the spread of the coronavirus, although according to 2 studies published in a Journal of Internal Medicine, a report published by Oxford, the New England Journal of Medicine, and a new study, facial coverings are not slowing the spread of the coronavirus. People are wearing the mask, but the issue is that the numbers are not going down. There's not a conclusive relationship between mask wearing and fewer transmissions. But this is something that the elites tell us, but it is untrue.
Yeah, and that's another controversial thing as well. They talk about following the science, and this is obviously a term that has been overused. But it seems to me the science is basically what they dictate.
Exactly. And the science is always changing. Let me give a perfect example. So originally, the elites told us that we shouldn't wear face masks because they were concerned that there would not be enough masks for essential workers. Now we're being told that they're important, even though the data and frequent studies are refuting this view. And another point against this, we were once told that after vaccination, don't wear a mask. Now we're told that please mask up. So the elites keep changing their views because the science is not consistent. Remember, COVID is a new disease, so it will take us some time to truly understand it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I also I had a guest on my podcast last year who actually survived COVID, and he was saying more or less the same thing, is that with regards to government interference in our lives with regards to the disease, the question is really, how far can the government go? Because the problem is that now we're in a situation, and this is in the United States from what I can see, and also in South Africa. It's just that in South Africa, our vaccination pace is much slower than the rest of the world. So we're not at that point yet where they're saying that if there's enough people vaccinated, then no one has to wear a mask. So we kind of lagging behind in that respect. But we were looking at Biden, and there was a video where they showed Biden saying that if you are vaccinated, you won't have to wear a mask. And then they confronted him on that, and he said he didn't say it. So it's really a terrible situation to be in, because you've got people that have this idea of ruling by decree, and they're not held accountable. That's the second thing. And then on top of that, people's lives are getting destroyed because of the decrees that they're making. And then now you also mentioned that the masks show, the evidence shows that the masks are not working, but yet they still persist that we should wear them.
Just recently, an expert on CNN uttered this point.
Mm-hmm.
The Epoch Times reported on the story. There's no strong evidence to suggest that the mask is an actual deterrent.
Right, right. I mean, I heard that the actual, if I'm not mistaken, but the actual virus itself, it's so small, it can actually go through the threads of the mask anyway, because if you look at it from a microscopic level, there are gaps that the virus can actually go through. So it's for me, it's just like, you know, it's the political response for me, I think has been overblown. I think, you know, I was kind of impressed with Sweden.
Yes,
They
I'm
didn't go
glad you
for a.
mentioned Sweden because recently I read a writer saying that relative to other countries in Europe, Sweden is improving and Sweden did not tolerate the idiocy of a lockdown.
Exactly. And it's always, I know Sweden is a cautionary tale, but it's really a lesson that we can learn, that the government does not have to be so heavily involved in a situation like this. And I just think for me, you know, the lockdowns are, it's a cure that's worse than the disease. You know, it seems to me that the government interference has just made this much worse. The virus has done its damage. Yes, people have died. Yes, people have, you know, experienced negative effects. They've lost loved ones and so forth. But I mean, the other damage that the government has been causing, which is being totally ignored in many respects, like the amount of people that have become unemployed. I mean, people having to go hungry and so forth, and people getting depression, some people even committing suicide as a result, or people actually missing special treatments because when I mean special, I mean elective surgeries, because of the
Because of
fact
fear.
that, because of fear. I mean, even with me, right? I just had a surgery on my elbow for cubital tunnel syndrome, and I was suffering with I was struggling with this since 2019. Then 2020, I made the decision to actually go and get something done. But then COVID came, and then I had to wait for like another 12 months before I had the courage to actually go out and get it done. Fortunately, I got it done, but you know, but still, you know, how many other people have missed cancer treatments that could have actually saved their lives because of COVID? I mean, it's a terrible situation, and I think the government, in my opinion, as Thomas Sowell stated, like it's really stupid to put someone in power who makes decisions for you, and I'm paraphrasing him, where that person cannot actually pay the price for being wrong. And years from now, in our country, Ramaphosa is not going to pay the price for the damage that has been caused by the regulations that he's put in place. You probably will be long gone anyway.
The long-term impact of the COVID-19 lockdown measures will be detrimental, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. The reality is this, Dumo. COVID-19 is a disease, but on average, these decedents are older people and those who are already ill. Therefore, from a cost benefit analysis, are the measures worth their salt? The answer is no.
Yeah, definitely. It's not worth it. And I think just to give just a South African perspective on this matter, I think for me, it's in South Africa, our ANC government, they obviously, if you saw in the 1960s, they were influenced heavily by the Soviet Union, which is no longer around today. And they have this plan called the National Democratic Revolution. And this is a plan where they want to turn South Africa into a socialist state where, but this model is a bit different. It's where the party will control the state and the state will control the economy. So basically, the lockdowns or the state of emergency, okay, well, the state of emergency that we're having in South Africa as a result of the COVID-19, presented an opportunity for the government to actually have their own little NDR, National Democratic Revolution. So basically, you got Ramaphosa, who is this central planner who decides how the economy is going to run, who can sell what at what time, and so forth. And as a result of that, this is basically what the ANC wanted many years ago. And now the opportunity has presented itself with regards to COVID-19 and the lockdown. And what is also very sad about this is that the government has introduced this grant called a COVID-19 grant. So basically, this is supposed to help people who have lost their jobs as a result of the lockdowns and so forth. And it's a grant of 350 Rand. It's not even like, I think it's less than $30, if to be honest, $30 a month that's what you'll get. And basically, in a nutshell, this is the ANC wants more people to be dependent on the state. So also to give some perspective on the lockdowns in South Africa, what you must also realize is that the ANC is in a position where they feel they're losing support. We were supposed to have municipal elections this year in October, but it seems that it's going to be moved to next year in March. And the ANC knows that people hate them right now. So what they've done, they've extended this COVID-19 grant just as a way to kind of ease people up at the polls so that when they do vote, they'll most likely vote for the ANC. But they want to make this permanent. They want to make this grant permanent. And I think that was the idea from the beginning, was that the lockdowns were they knew that the lockdowns would put a lot of people out of work and make people more dependent on the state. And therefore they'll create more reliable voters by actually extending this grant and making it more permanent. And that's another thing about this lockdown, is that it presented the ANC with an opportunity to create more reliable voters so that they can secure their electoral future, which is also a terrible situation to be in as well.
The parasitic stress perspective is being played out in real time, courtesy of COVID-19. During a pandemic, people tend to conform because if they do not conform, the disease may proliferate. And as such, the government often institutes totalitarian measures under the guise of containing the spread of a disease. So the COVID-19 pandemic is a perfect case study.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and the totalitarianism has ramped up so much. I mean, if it happened outside of a pandemic, people would be more active than they were now with regards to resisting the government. But a lot of people are scared. A lot of people don't want to catch the disease, like myself and everyone else. And, and because of the nature of the disease, and also in the media, like saying, and mantras in the media, like staying safe, don't spread the virus and so forth. That has kind of made people focus the attention on not spreading the virus and actually missing the ramp up in totalitarianism from the state, which is something that we all should be paying attention to.
But Dumo, COVID-19 is impacted by biological and environmental factors and also individual factors. So for example, if you're a smart person who is so afraid of contracting COVID, then maybe you ought to adjust your diet. People should take responsibility for health.
Right. Health, and that's the thing, and it's our body, right? It's your body. People are responsible for their own bodies. So definitely, if there is a virus around that puts a lot of, let's say, obese people or people with comorbidities at risk, then we should take necessary actions to actually improve our immune systems, or to beef up our bodies, or to power them up, however you want to put it, or to improve our bodies in such a way so that if we do contract the virus, we'll be in a better position to fight it off. And it's very interesting that has not been promoted. It's funny because
vitamin C, D, and E may be able to assist in the event that you contract COVID-19. But continue to make your point.
Yes, definitely. And talking about that, I never heard much of that from the media. The media, it's always wear a mask, stay away from people, and take the vaccine. Those are the three things that they have suggested. And it's only on alternative media where actually, like your channel, where people say, vitamin C, eat healthy, everything like that. It's only on alternative channels where they say that. And that's a very interesting trend that I've noticed. I think I I just think the government really does not work within our interest, as in the individual's interest. They work within their own interest, you know? And I think people should understand that. Like, as Thomas Sowell said, and I'm again paraphrasing him, he said that, you know, politicians work to benefit themselves first, like each and every other human being. We work to benefit ourselves. And I think that's what we should be doing. You know, how do I benefit from this situation? Well, the best way to do it is to eat healthy, lose some weight, go to gym, you know, and put
I'm
yourself in a
happy,
good position.
Dumo. I'm actually quite elated that you refer to the gym, because I've been looking at some studies. I'm yet to read them, but some medical professionals are showing that there is a link between exercise, health, and staving off COVID.
Yes, it is actually a good link, and I think intuitively it makes sense. Now I'm not sure about the science, but it does make sense. You know, if you are in good shape, and you're working out, and you know you're eating well at the same time, and you put in the right vitamins in your body, you are probably going to strengthen your immune system. So, I mean, intuitively, yes, it does sound correct. Yeah.
Remember, Dumo, the state is a parasitic entity depending on nutrients. Now, what is the nutrient that is required by the state? This nutrient is power. The state thrives on power. And COVID provides an opportunity for the state to expand its authority.
Definitely.
And
Definitely.
elites are working in sync with the state. So, for example, according to Google's mobility data, there is not a clear link between social distancing and the fewer transmissions.
Interesting.
Yes.
So if there's no link,
it's not a
between the
clear link.
two,
It's not clear cut, but it is still promoted as a viable anti-COVID-19 strategy.
yeah, then it's funny that the elites and the government say we should follow the science, but when you look at the science, it's not confirming their regulations. It's not confirming it. I mean, I'm not saying that they should put regulations in place that confirm the science, but it's even worse when you put a regulation in place and the science does not support it. That's a tough situation to be in.
COVID-19 is just exposing the hypocrisy of elites, the media, and highlighting the importance of the viable alternative media. So, for example, some in the alternative space spew garbage, but there are few groups who are not as erratic as their colleagues. There are people who are serious who will furnish their listeners with accurate data.
Right. I mean, one of them being, I think Brett Weinstein and his wife Heather.
Yeah,
remember they?
Yeah, I remember Brett and Heather, but I must confess I don't listen to them frequently, though.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, they did a podcast on, you know, on ivermectin and so forth, and other treatments and so forth, and they got banned from YouTube as a result of that.
Well, I am happy that you mentioned that drug, because there is a study published by a journal noting that the effects of it are positive. It was published by the Journal of Therapeutic Science. Sorry, I can't remember the name, but the Epoch Times referred to the study and the name of the journal that authored the study. But YouTube,
right.
Dumo, YouTube is not a serious space. YouTube is an instrument of totalitarianism.
I agree. I agree. You know, the thing about YouTube and its censorship, or some would say, some may not call it censorship. Some may say moderation of the content that it's put on there for other reasons. But the problem is that now YouTube is in sync with these government organizations, or especially in the US, from what I can see. And they are trying to be this arbiter of truth. And that's not YouTube's, it shouldn't be YouTube's mandate.
YouTube is in the business of making money. It is not a real media entity.
There you go. And what is funny is that, like, can YouTube be held responsible for like someone promoting an alternative drug to use to treat COVID.
No, and and this is why I am contemptuous of political correctness, because political correctness is a distraction. YouTube should be creating policies to augment the user experience, but instead it is wasting time genuflecting to the demands of an insipid culture.
Exactly. And I think for me, this presents another opportunity because I know YouTube has a massive base of subscribers, a massive base of viewers that probably no other media house can compete with. But the great thing about it is that there's other platforms like Odyssey, for example, which is I think it's based on library.com. And I think for me, it's a brilliant alternative space.
But people are not into Odyssey. That's the problem.
That's true, but it's gonna grow. I think
it is growing, but the people on the alternative right should express confidence in their product and divest themselves from mainstream platforms like YouTube.
Yeah, and I think some have done that. But it's just that a lot of the audience is on YouTube, and getting all of them over to Odyssey
it's difficult.
It's difficult, and I understand that, because YouTube, I mean, like, for example, I mean, if you want to go watch videos, I'm pretty sure among many consumers, the first thing that comes to mind is YouTube, right? It's not Odyssey. So I don't think Odyssey, I think as a brand, YouTube is so powerful that it's even for me, when I go to bed at night, before I go to bed, what's the first thing I do? I go on YouTube and I check what's showing on YouTube. You know what I mean? So it has become so integral in many people's lives that it's very difficult for them to move off though. But I do understand that YouTube has become very problematic with which content it decides to show and not to show, especially when it comes to topics like what we're discussing now. But I also understand that if I want to look for topics where, if I look for discussions where people are honest and there's no censorship, then I will go to Odyssey. And that's fine, because I have a platform to go to now. So I just see Odyssey and and Rumble and so forth as these new platforms that people can take advantage of. And I encourage people to do that. I mean, take advantage of those platforms. Like, it's one thing to fight YouTube, sorry, but you don't have to beat YouTube by taking them to court. You can beat them by creating alternative
exactly
platforms.
And this is what people like me and you should do when we get more money. I am all for creating an alternative platform to rival YouTube. People on the right like to lament the hypocrisy of YouTube, and that is just silly. Instead of lamenting, be creative. Don't retweet some lame left-wing writer who's never commenting or proposing anything sensible. Promotes intelligent people on the right with an actual worldview that's worth exploring. So usually some on the right try to be base by mocking leftists, but they're actually being quite boring. We need an agenda, a true alternative. So, for example, on my show, I expose views of both the left and the right, but I don't entertain the inanity of the left because I have a bigger purpose.
Right. And I think and I think that's what distinguishes you well from other content creators. And it also shows in the growth of your channel. It's growing very quickly. And I think people have noticed that, and even I've noticed that, the way you positioned yourself as well. And I mean, just going back to just talking about like the battle between the left and the right, and the what's on Twitter, and the shocking content that people put out there. And I agree with you. I think now people just tend to gravitate towards content where someone is ranting about the left and the hypocrisy and stuff like that. And I've seen even among the right as well, there's a group of what I call reactionaries, right? So reactionaries tend to do that, is that they will just rely on the hypocrisy of the left. But then when you look at the alternative that they provide, it's probably the left-wing version. It's probably the right-wing version of what the left is producing. And that's what I've seen and that's what I've encountered.
Perfect example. So for example, many of these guys, they have a large audience. It's just surprisingly huge. But in terms of content, they don't have much to offer. And that's unfortunate. The leading figures on the right who are popular are intellectually inept. And even if they're brilliant on paper, their brilliance is not illuminated by the books that they write or their articles.
Right. Because usually their articles is just showing hypocrisy.
Just mocking Ibram Kendi. I don't care for Ibram Kendi. That's all they're doing.
No, I totally agree. And this is, I think, also I think the hunger for sophisticated content like your channel, for example, it's a niche market, because I've seen that, you know, from what I have seen, because even from my channel as well, when I looked at my channel growth and so forth, what has happened is that a lot of people tend to they like these individuals. Like, I mean, like I'm going to give you a few names, and these names, I don't have any qualms against them. I don't have any beef or whatever. You know, I don't know them personally, but when I look at their content, it's really brain dead. So, for example, I look at someone like Brandon Tatum, for example.
Yeah, a waste of time. No. look. Let's be realistic. Dumo.
Yeah.
I'm a libertarian, and as libertarians, we're not interested in race. And contrary to what many would assume, libertarians are defending Western civilization because the concept of freedom and individualism emerged in the West. And if you want, you may consult Orlando Patterson, who is a man of the left. So as libertarians, we like Western civilization because Western civilization abolished slavery. The Industrial Revolution occurred in the West. I don't want to talk about the West for a long time, but you clearly get the point. We like the West for a specific reason. But and I'm just saying this because it is often said that libertarians are racist. So, for example, one economist who's really brilliant, I sent him an email. I wanted to do an interview, and he said, "Well, you're a serious guy, but you write for Mises," and apparently he's not a fan of F.A. Hayek. So libertarians have been smeared by the media on both the left and the right, especially the National Review in the early days. Many of our younger readers may be unaware, but William Buckley, in a sense, ruined the right, because Buckley wrote many brilliant men and women out of the conservative movement. And today we're paying the price.
Right. Yeah, I think, libertarianism has been given a bad rap over time. And I think for me, unfairly so. So I'll tell you from the right. So I have seen a lot of people on the reactionary side, on the right. They tend to critique libertarianism based on its fight against socialism. So they'll say libertarianism is useless because it doesn't give us a handbook or a manual to fight against socialism or fight against the current insurgence of cultural Marxism. And I'm saying, but look, libertarianism is not for that. Libertarianism is an ideology that's based on the relationship between the states and its citizens and how they should interact with each other, you know, and then you get concepts like the non-aggression principle and so forth. Like there's this one reactionary, right, who lives in America right now. He was using like ancient examples as to why libertarianism doesn't work. And I'm like, look, the reality is that if you're going to go back into the biblical times to show why libertarianism doesn't work, it's stupid, because libertarianism,
it is stupid for several reasons.
Did not exist then. It did not even exist.
No, but Dumo, using the Bible to disprove libertarianism is stupid, because properly understood, the Bible reflects anarchism, not socialism. Exactly. And you may read Jacques Ellul. He was a prominent writer. Jacques Ellul.
Yes.
Yeah, libertarian, properly understood, Christianity is more on the anarcho-capitalist right than the socialist left. And Jeff Degner is another person you can read. He's an upcoming academic.
Right.
But yes,
Right.
Christianity is not compatible with socialism or Marxism. And why would it be? Remember, Christianity asserts that we are creatures of God. We were made
Yeah.
in the image of God. Therefore, Christianity is an individualistic philosophy. Philosophers have even written that the God of the Bible is actually quite democratic. He enters into a contract with his people. He
Yes,
creates an
exactly.
opportunity for freedom of will. God does not
Right.
want robots. We're endowed with autonomy. So, properly understood, a Christian cannot be a Marxist because Marxism is one, an atheistic philosophy, and secondly, it is not pro individualism.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, again, it's just
100%.
confusion. It's just
It's
confusion.
and I like that. It's confusion. I think that's actually the best way to put this mess. It's just confusion at best. And what I find very disappointing is that these people who embrace the confusion and take advantage of it by spewing more by spewing more content that doesn't provide any value to the intellectual discussion, they get all the followers,
Exactly. So,
right? They
Duma, back to your brain dead people. On this show, I don't engage in mudslinging. I'm not interested in gossip. But you
yeah,
mentioned Brandon Tatum, Duma. If
yeah,
we're being realistic, the perceived black intellectuals are contrarians who are being promoted by the left and the right are indeed boring. They're boring because they're only responding to a genuine left. So, for example,
exactly.
arguing that critical race perspectives are nonsensical doesn't make you smart. It is obvious. It is a given. Criticizing Black Lives Matter does not make you a conservative. Black Lives
Right,
Matter is a dubious group. That is a given. I have done research, I have written on the issue. The evidence indicating that blacks are disproportionately killed by the police is virtually non existent. So, to critique Black Lives Matter, one is not really a conservative. You cannot situate conservatism in the critique of Black Lives Matter. Conservatism
right,
is broader, and the Paul Gottfried, who is a genius, I had him on the show, and he disagreed with me to an extent, but we both agreed that conservatism is a philosophy explaining a particular worldview or a culture. So, for example, as a conservative, you could be preserving the Judeo-Christian heritage of the West,
right,
the Greco-Roman heritage that is essentially pagan, or the ideas of Edmund Burke or the American Revolution. Blacks who are conservatives follow Booker T. Washington, and Booker T. Washington posited self-help. So
yes,
black conservatives are often capitalists. They believe in economic freedom, but conservatism is broader than economic freedom and free markets. It's contingent on a particular worldview. So judging from this criteria, the average black conservative is not really a conservative in the Western tradition. He or she is a conservative in the tradition of Booker T. Washington, but not a Western conservative like Edmund Burke or the German conservatives.
right. And in South Africa, that's why in South Africa I always avoid being called a conservative, right? Because if you say in South Africa you're a conservative, what are you conserving in South Africa? Because now, if you think about it, you let's say in South Africa we had apartheid, for example, and now if a white person in South Africa says they're conservative, they think that a lot of them try to align with the American conservative, but in South Africa it's a different ball game altogether. That's why I don't even like to use the term
A
conservative in South Africa.
conservative in the African context is just simply a traditional person. You are pro family and
Yeah,
against gay marriage and also pro Christianity and sometimes pro conservative African religions, but you're not a conservative in the Western American sense.
right. And now, but and also to add on to that as well, there are conservatives who um, may, like, let's say they like if they may approve of the NP, which was the party of apartheid. Basically, they were the governing party during apartheid times, and then there are those who believe that the NP is the right party or was the right party and stuff like that. So as you and I agree with you when you say that it's contingent on a worldview. conservatism is contingent on a worldview, and I agree with that. And the worldview may vary from one society to
Exactly
another,
my point.
and they may want to conserve that particular worldview. I totally agree with that. That's actually a good analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, so personally, I think that with the exception of literally three prominent people, other people exist, but these are the most prominent exponents of Black conservatism. Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, and Elizabeth Wright. Elizabeth Wright is not as popular, but these are the three most prominent exponents of Black conservatism. And then there's Larry Elder. But on average, many Black conservatives are just real idiots. I don't take them seriously.
Wow,
Like,
Lipton, why are you so harsh? Why are you so
it
harsh,
is the
Lipton?
truth.
Why?
Like, when white people listen to Brandon, whatever his name is, or that Tariq character, or any of those other minstrels, they're really just saying, okay, we do accept that the black-white IQ gap is consistent, and these are the best products of the Black community. So, in other words, when you give audience to the typical Black conservative, you really don't like Black people.
Right, right. Fair enough.
Like,
Fair enough. Fair enough.
seriously, yeah. See, it's not just you're being quite coy. I'm speaking the truth.
Yes, yes, yes. It's true. But I mean, but now I just want to go back to libertarianism being unfairly criticized. I
Yes.
mean, because I'm a libertarian myself, and I think we get unfairly criticized quite a bit. But now I'm just thinking, maybe I know you the one interviewing, but I just want to know from your perspective, like, what do you think is the best way to reach people with the message of libertarianism?
Be simple. So, for example, the argument against the minimum wage is about human rights and not economics. So, therefore, if research indicates that the minimum wage is a positive, it is still bad because it is violating contractual rights.
Exactly. I like that.
Yeah.
Then,
so, for example, free trade is about the right to choose. Why should you sacrifice your desires to enrich the state or protectionism? Free trade is a violation of the individual and his right to choose. So when libertarians articulate a cogent moral argument in favor of pro-market policies, then we will build support. So I have a piece on the topic written in the publication called Merriam West, titled The Moral Case for Capitalism. Capitalism is a moral system. Remember, Adam Smith was a moral philosopher and then an economist.
Right. I like that. And I think that's probably what many libertarians will probably gonna have to do, because I think the problem is that from a cultural perspective, from what I've seen from people, especially, and I'm talking from the American perspective, right? Just because American politics like really affects South African politics in many ways. So from what I've seen in American politics, libertarians are seen as like these gunslinging nutcases, who just are unaware of other things that happen in society. But I think that's totally incorrect. I mean, they are very intelligent libertarians out there.
On average, libertarians are extremely smart. And I'm not saying this because
Exactly.
you're a libertarian, but they're pretty smart according to the data.
Yes, they are smart, but the public perception is that they're dumb. And I think your strategy is that we have to kind of change that public perception. And I agree with you. There has to be that. I think sometimes as libertarians we get too smart for ourselves.
Yeah, they're too philosophical. So, for example,
Yes.
I'm a libertarian realist. No state can be libertarian. The state is essentially predicated on force. But to survive in a society, we should advocate a pro-liberal state. But the state is essentially anti-libertarian. Libertarians want to gut the state without providing a replacement that ordinary people can digest. They need to approach it from a reform perspective.
Brilliant. I like that. And I think that's the next. I think for me, this is something that I am very passionate about. Is like, how do you reach people with regards to the libertarian message? And I like your approach. And I think you're going to go very far, to be honest. I mean, just looking at the people that you've had on your channel and the amount of subscribers that you're getting and at the pace at which you're getting it at, I think you're going to do very well, Lipton.
Thanks a lot. But we're still having a conversation. We're talking about South Africa. So flattery is okay, but I'm not really impressed by flattery. So we're going to move on to continue to talk about South Africa. Yeah, I'm not an emotional person. Dumo, have you been following CRT, critical race perspective in America? Some on the right are arguing that South Africa is the best example to show how critical race perspective can lead to the undoing of a country. So there's an article published by Revolver, and I'm going to read a snippet. South Africa was the first modern nation to be refounded on the anti-white principles of critical race theory, and now it is reaping the whirlwind of that choice. South Africa did everything that is being done in America right now. As a hyper-diverse, multi-ethnic, multilingual society, South Africa has followed almost every prescription embraced by the globalist ruling class.
Right.
Do you agree?
I agree. I think South Africa's the South African experiment with regards to critical race theory, from what I have experienced, really basically is that, just to give you a brief history of what has happened, South Africa has this this idea called transformation. So transformation is this idea of actually trying to undo what happened during apartheid. So apartheid, obviously, it was a racial segregation system that caused a lot of havoc. So a lot of people had this idea that, look, in order for us to reverse the injustices of apartheid, we need to have some sort of policies in place. One of them is that they have this thing called BEE.
Yes, Black Economic Empowerment.
Yes, but now they changed it to broad-based Black economic empowerment. So I think it's triple BEE, but it keeps changing, but it's more or less the same thing. So this is an idea where the state tries to encourage bigger companies and employers to hire Black people or women of color and so forth, so that they can get specific benefits, right, from the state. Usually, if your BE rating is high, the state will be more likely to do business with you than if your BE rating was low. So that's one of the things that they've done. They've also introduced affirmative action policies as well. They call the Employment Equity Act as well, which also kind of dictates who should be hired for a job. Just from an anecdotal perspective, I know a lot of white people who said that they've been turned down for a job because
just like what's occurred in America. Eder McDonald has written on the issue. White men can be rejected on account of their race.
Right. And that is a problem because ultimately what this has done, it has skewed the market incentives in the wrong way. Walter Williams wrote a book called South Africa's War on Capitalism in 1989. And he said that from what if you look at the minimum wage, for example, as you mentioned before, you said there's a moral argument against it. So what Walter Williams showed was that even though in South Africa in the late 1980s, they had laws that encouraged white people to be hired over blacks, the cost of hiring black people are so cheap that, businesses took advantage of it, right? So, and I think what he was trying to show there was that, the market incentives actually play a massive role, even when there are racial segregation laws or laws that tell you who you can hire and who you shouldn't hire. So from a South African perspective, let's say now, I'm just going back to the article that you mentioned, it is an example of critical race theory going wrong, because from my understanding of critical race theory,
it is not an example of critical race theory going wrong. It's an example of critical race theory doing what it intends to achieve. It is an anti-white philosophy, so it's actually going in the right direction.
Okay, fair enough. If you want to put it in the perspective of anti-white or anti-white, I would say yes. But when I say gone wrong, I mean as in there's so many ramifications as a result that when you weigh it up against really the intended purpose as the government stated it, to transform the economy and make it more equitable, it's really not equitable at all. And basically, if you look at BEE in a nutshell, all that it has done really, it has just strengthened the political elite. People that were politically connected to the government, they're the ones that benefits. So, for example, if you look at, I think last week, there was our health minister, the health minister, William Kize, was actually implicated in a scandal where worth millions of rands. But the reality is that what enabled that to occur was the BEE. And also now to go back to critical race theory going right, you're 110% correct on that as well. Because when what I have seen over time is that people have this idea that we need to transform it. Like, let me put it to you this way: they have this idea that the natural demographic of a country has to reflect
The majority group.
Has to reflect in each and every situation.
Utter
in social
nonsense.
interaction. Yes, which is true. It's utter nonsense. And that logic is dangerous because now if you look even in sports, for example, sports is a perfect example where you find that there are some players who would make the team irrespective of the policies. But because they are black, what actually happens is that they get labeled as a quota player or something like that. And on top of that, you get players being overlooked because they say, sorry,
white.
we've reached the quota. Exactly. And it's not only, and also just to, it's not only because they're white, there's also, they rank people, remember. It's because in South Africa, we have an Indian diaspora as well. We also have another group of people called coloreds. Now, I know for American audience, that may sound offensive, but it's actually an official term. This is basically to a group of people where basically it's mixed race, and it also includes Malay people as well. So they refer to as colored people. In America, people that are mixed race will usually be referred to as black. So they rank people according to race. So if you're a black female, you're right at the top, then it's black male, and then so forth. And what also is also dangerous with this whole critical race theory is that for colored people in South Africa, this has been devastating because during apartheid, they were too black to be white. And then now after apartheid, they're too white.
They're essentially white. And the implications of this ranking system is a disaster for productivity. Let me read another snippet from an article published in the New York Post, written by someone who is South African. Firms were also required to meet racial quotas in hiring and ensure that management was racially representative, meaning roughly 88% black. Tendering for government business became increasingly pointless because contracts were invariably awarded to black-owned firms, even if their prices were double, triple, or tenfold. And some of these black-owned firms were less productive. And the Revolver article gives real examples.
Right. I can give you one example. In our airline, South African Airways, there was it was a massive scandal, right? Where there was a company, South African Airways wanted to restructure its debt. And what happened was they gave it to a company that was charging 200 million. And it was found out that this company was actually connected to the president of that time, which was Zuma. And there was someone who's also close to Zuma as well, called Dumo as well. She actually tried to get this deal over the line. And someone within South African Airways was brave enough to actually bring this up, because she said, listen, why are we paying 200 million to restructure our debt when all the other banks within the country are willing to pay, let's say, willing to charge us 5 million or 10 million? you know? And she brought this up to the CFO, Chief Financial Officer. That was brought down, and she had to take it to a civil rights group. And eventually the civil rights group actually, what they did was they got a court interdict to actually stop the deal from occurring. And you know what is funny? When they asked the people who made that deal occur, they asked them, why did you choose that company? Because since they were charging you so much. And they said, well, it's because they met our BEE requirements. And I mean, this is the foolishness of it. And I agree with that quote that companies, just because they had enough of what they call black representation, were given contracts and they charged ridiculous prices for them. And this is actually a tool that the government uses to, and you'll find that, the people that actually get these contracts
are wealthy.
Are people that are not even wealthy, but are people that are connected to the political elite already, people that are loyal to the ANC. And you find that those are the ones who actually benefit, and they charge these ridiculous prices on top of that.
So in a nutshell, Dumo, black elites in South Africa, they have replaced white racism with black patrimonialism. So instead of appropriating the superior aspects of white culture, they have created a corrupt society that's underpinned by low levels of productivity and racism. So, for example, reports are also telling us that necklacing is becoming popular again, and in some areas, racial divisions are on the increase.
Right. Okay, so when it comes to racism in South Africa with racial divisions and so forth, this is something that we have race, just like America, we have race hustlers, right? Who are there to just stoke racial tensions. Now, with regards to the necklacing, that hasn't been happening as much as you would see back in the 1980s, for example. So if you look in the 1980s, necklacing was quite a big thing, but it has happened over time in isolated incidents, like for mob justice and so forth. But there is an element of the elites trying to stoke up racial tensions as a way to kind of get their way with things. So, for example, I don't know if you saw, there was that big scandal with Bell Pottinger, a British company that was actually hired to stoke racial tensions in South Africa. Recently, we actually had, there was someone who was on Twitter, a 32-year-old man. He was actually in court now because he was actually paid to create a Twitter account posing as a white woman that was insulting black people. So the thing about it is that race peddling in South Africa is used as some sort of way to drive divisions among people. But when you look at the actual surveys, there's a civil rights group in South Africa called the Institute of Race Relations. They did a survey on about, I think, 2,000 black people. I'm not sure, but it's quite a number. And they found that if you look at the biggest problems that black people face in South Africa, how they ranked them, they said unemployment and corruption are like right at the top, but racism was like right at the bottom. So even among black South Africans, you could find that racism may be a problem, but it's not the problem. But then when you look at the elite, the political elite, to try to push the message, those ones are trying to stoke the racial tension
because
and they benefit from it.
Remember, they pander from race hustling. They're the ones who will get the affirmative action programs and the contracts from the state. So they pander from race hustling. But Dumo, our conversation is really intense, it's interesting, but unfortunately I have to wrap up. But before I wrap up, I will say this. Business Tech reported in 3 years, the middle class shrank 56%, the ultra poor grew 54%, and this is in relation to South Africa. So the consequence of these policies is the greater immiseration of poor people, courtesy of black elites.
Right. Agreed. 110%. And thank you for quoting Business Tech. I read them every day.
Yeah, but it was a pleasure to speak to you, Dumo. But unfortunately, all good conversations must end, and I have to say bye.
All right.
All
Thanks.
right, then.
And
Yeah.
can I say one more thing? Just
Of
one
course.
One more thing. All right. Lipton, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I just wish you all the best with your channel growth and so forth. You're doing something great. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Duma. Bye.
Cool. Cheers.
Okay. So
All right.
let me lock sign off. The internet's a bit. Yeah.
Okay. All right.